She was left at the edge of the plains just after sunrise, where the grass grew thin and the wind never seemed to stop moving. Too small, they said. Too weak to survive the work. Too quiet to matter. She stood there with a bundle clutched to her chest, watching the wagon disappear in a cloud of dust that did not look back. Her name was Leela, and she had learned early that being small made people forget you were human. By noon, the sun burned her skin. By evening, fear settled in her bones. That was when the ground began to tremble. At first, she thought it was thunder. Then she saw him crest the ridge, taller than any man she had ever seen, shoulders broad as a doorway, hair dark and braided, eyes sharp and steady. A Comanche warrior wrapped in worn leather and silence. She froze. He did not reach for a weapon. He did not shout. He dismounted slowly and crouched so his shadow wouldn't swallow her whole. "Why are you alone?" he asked, his voice deep but careful, like he was afraid of breaking something fragile. Her throat tightened. "They said I was too small." The giant frowned, not in anger but confusion, as if the idea itself made no sense. He offered her water first, then food, then his horse's blanket when night fell and the cold crept in. "My name is Tan," he said simply. "You will not sleep here." She expected him to take her somewhere, to a camp, a town, another decision made without her. Instead, he led her deep into the trees where the wind softened and the ground rose gently. He built a fire with practiced hands and sat across from her all night, saying little, keeping watch. The next morning, he did something no one had ever done for her before. He stayed. Days passed, then weeks. Tayan hunted and gathered. Leela learned the forest, where berries grew, how to read the sky, how to listen without fear. She spoke more as time went on. He listened every time as if her words mattered. One morning, she woke to the sound of chopping. He was building something. Logs shaped with care, a roof angled just right, a doorway low enough for her, not him. When she realized what it was, her chest ached. "For you," he said, almost shy, "small does not mean unworthy." The cabin took time. He worked slowly, precisely, like every strike of the axe was a promise. When it was done, it stood sturdy and warm, smoke curling from its chimney like it had always belonged there. Leela touched the doorframe. "No one ever built anything for me." Tayan knelt so they were eye to eye. Then it was overdue. Trouble came, as it always does. Men arrived looking for her, claiming ownership, debts, mistakes. Tayan stood in front of the cabin, unmoving, a wall made of muscle and certainty. "She stays," he said. They laughed until they didn't. After that, no one came again. Years softened her edges, not hardened them. She grew, not taller than she'd been, but stronger in ways no one could measure. She learned to read, to trade, to heal. Travelers stopped by the cabin, surprised to find welcome there. They called it the Giant's Cabin. But Leela knew better. When she stood beside Tayan at sunset, her hand fitting easily into his massive one, she finally understood something the world had tried to teach her wrong. She had never been too small. She had simply been waiting for someone big enough, in heart, not size, to see her. And the giant who built her a cabin never once tried to make her smaller. He made space. The cabin changed the way the land breathed. Smoke from its chimney became a signal, not of danger but of warmth. Travelers learned to look for it when storms rolled in too fast or when the road behind them had taken more than it gave back. Leela noticed how Tayan always made room, an extra bowl, another blanket, a quiet place near the fire. He never explained why. He didn't need to. As years passed, Leela's hands grew skilled. She learned how to stitch hides so cleanly they looked like cloth, how to set bones, how to brew teas that eased pain without dulling the mind. People stopped calling her small. They called her careful, steady, kind. One winter, sickness came with the snow. A child from a nearby camp arrived burning with fever. Leela worked through the night, Tayan feeding the fire, lifting water, saying nothing but staying close enough that she could lean back when her strength wavered. By dawn, the child slept peacefully. Word spread. When men who once dismissed her returned, older now, eyes tired, they didn't look down, they asked. Tayan watched it all from the edges, pride quiet and unannounced. One evening, Leela found him repairing the cabin's doorframe, making it stronger against storms. "You built this for me," she said softly. He nodded, "so the wind wouldn't decide where you belong." She swallowed, "You never asked me to leave. You never needed to earn staying." That was when she understood the difference between protection and possession. Trouble came again, different this time. A trader brought news of a settlement forming nearby. Land claims, lines drawn where none had existed, papers that pretended the earth could be owned. "They'll come," the trader warned. "They always do." Tayan stood taller at that, not threatening, resolute. "If they come," he said, "they will meet us." And they did. Men with documents and confidence arrived one afternoon, speaking of boundaries and rights. Leela listened. Then she stepped forward, voice calm. "This cabin was built with consent," she said. "With work, with care. We harm no one, we take nothing that isn't given." The men looked to Tayan, expecting intimidation. They found patience instead. "You may draw lines," he said, "but you will not erase people." Something in his certainty unsettled them. They left with promises to return. They never did. Time did what it does best. It made legends out of quiet truths. People said a giant lived in the woods, that he guarded a woman too small to be seen by the cruel world, that the cabin could not be taken. They were wrong about one thing. It wasn't guarded by size or strength. It was held by choice. When Leela stood in the doorway at dusk, the light catching the grain of the wood he'd shaped for her, she felt taller than she ever had. Not because she'd grown, but because someone had built a place where she never had to shrink again. Years folded into one another so gently that Leela sometimes forgot there had ever been a time before the cabin. The girl who had once been left on the plains grew into a woman whose presence settled a room. She still stood small beside Tayan's towering frame, but no one mistook her for fragile anymore. Her voice carried certainty. Her hands carried healing. Her eyes carried the memory of being abandoned, and the wisdom of never doing that to another. Children began to appear at the cabin. Not all at once, one at a time. A boy who'd lost his parents on the trail, a girl sent away because she limped. Two brothers who slept in turns, because they'd learned it was dangerous to rest together. Leela never turned them away. Tayan built another room, then another. He widened the table, carved stools low enough for small legs. When supplies ran thin, he hunted farther. When winter pressed hard, he reinforced the walls until the wind learned to go around them. One night, as snow fell thick and quiet, Leela found him sitting outside, staring at the stars. "You're tired," she said. He nodded. "I am not young anymore." She sat beside him, her shoulder barely reaching his arm. "You carried me when I couldn't stand. Let me carry some things now." He looked at her then, not as someone he protected, but as someone he trusted. From that winter on, they led together. When disputes came, Leela spoke first. When danger came, Tayan stood last. People learned that the cabin was not a refuge because it hid from the world, but because it faced it without cruelty. One spring morning, riders arrived again. Different uniforms, sharper eyes, they spoke of relocation, of laws, of moving people for their own good. Leela listened until they finished. Then she stepped forward, barefoot on the earth, and said quietly, "You left me once because I was too small. You don't get to do that again." Tayan moved beside her, not looming, anchoring. Behind them the children gathered. Men and women who had once passed through stood too, not many, but enough. The writers saw it then. This was no lone cabin, it was a community. They left. Years later, when Tayan's hair went fully silver and his hands trembled after long days, Leela built something for him. A bench outside the cabin, positioned just so, where the sun warmed his bones in the morning and the shade cooled him by afternoon. "For you," she said. He smiled, a rare slow thing. "You learned." When he passed, it was peacefully, with the sounds of life around him. Leela held his hand until it was still, her tears quiet, grateful rather than broken. They buried him near the cabin he had built with his own hands. People came, from far places, from remembered winters, from lives that had once been saved by a door opening instead of closing. Leela stayed. She kept the fire lit. And when a frightened girl once stood at the edge of the trees, too small and shaking, Leela walked out to meet her, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and said the words that had changed everything long ago. "You're not too small." And somewhere in the way the wind curved gently around the cabin, it was clear. The giant had built more than a shelter. He had built a legacy. One that taught the world that real strength is making space and refusing to let it be taken away.